Welcome to the Successful Athletes podcast, where we interview successful athletes to make you a faster cyclist. And in this episode, we are with Thorsten Gross. How you doing, Thorsten?
Very good. Thank you, Jonathan. How are you today?
Yeah, doing great. You actually reached out to me about coming onto this podcast, and you have a very unique. We haven't had a single person actually submit something that follows the vein that you are actually that we'll talk about today, which is the fact that I can't really put you into a bucket. I can't call you a triathlete. I can't call you a road cyclist. I can't call you a cross-country mountain biker, a downhill rider, because you do all of them. And that's the point of this episode here, is to talk about how you've been successful in those different disciplines and what you do to be successful in those ones, but also how they help you be successful in other disciplines as well. So this will be a fun one where we can learn from a versatile athlete across the board. First things first, though, where are you from? And then give everybody a background as far as what you do for work and what your family situation's like.
Yes, so thank you. Thanks for having me. It's quite exciting. I live in the north of Germany, a small town called Braunschweig, or Brunswick, as the American might say. I'm 37 years old. I work as a project manager for international innovation projects in the utility space. I have a wife and a small daughter of 3.5 years. So I already told you in advance. Apologies if she barges in. Yeah, she's always curious what daddy's doing.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Ours just turned 4. so yeah, it's a busy time around that age for sure. So let's get into your background in terms of cycling then. So when did you start riding? And I think if I have this correct, you started with mountain biking, or did you even start prior to that?
No, I started directly with mountain biking in my youth. So sometime in my teens, I took up mountain biking and went cross-country racing as a kid, as a youngster. From there, it slowly transitioned into more of what I think by the time was called free riding. So we were largely inspired by the old New World Disorder videos and Cranked and whatever they were called at the time. So
Yeah.
in our late teens, early 20s, we moved towards free riding, building dirt jumps and trails in the backyard. And from there, it slowly transitioned into downhill racing. So we, at some point, we switched the freeride bikes for proper downhill bikes. And then in the middle of my 20s, I took on full-on mountain bike downhill racing, first on national level, then also went to the European level.
Wow.
And by the time when I turned 30 and in my mid 30s, we moved to a different town. We moved away from the countryside and away from the mountains. So it became more difficult to maintain proper downhill time. And that's when I bought a road bike. And then from there, I've always been a runner as second nature. And from there, from road biking, it pretty quickly escalated into a triathlon. Did a few sprints in 2015, first half distance Ironman in 2017, first full distance in 2018. And it all culminated in half distance triathlon in February this year, briefly before the whole pandemic situation escalated, with the top 10 finish in the 70.3 in Oman.
Which means that you qualify for world championships, right?
Yeah. Actually, I became sixth in my age group, so the first roll down was mine. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you got your run split was particularly fast there, right?
Yeah, it looks good on paper because there were no pros at the race. The run split that day was a 13th overall that day, which was unexpected for me, but I'm extremely happy with that result. It was like a minute within my open half marathon time, 1:27. Wow. But again, if there would have been a pro field, it probably would have looked different.
Sure. But still, that's fast, like a 1:27 time around there, man, that's really, really fast. That's impressive. So I want to so you've gone from being a mountain biker to a downhill rider. And if most people know, you watch the downhill World Cup downhill racing, that sort of stuff, I I think it might be easy for a lot of folks to perhaps misunderstand how fit those athletes are that are performing at the top level of that sport. It's really complex. However, totally wouldn't, I wouldn't blame anybody for passing judgment on just a local downhill rider going like, oh man, they're far away from what I am as a cyclist because it's very different. But you've done that all
Yeah.
the way to finishing at the top of fields in a 70.3. Like you have ran such a wide spectrum. And you're living proof that not all triathletes are bad bike handlers.
No,
Because
not
I'm
sure about that, but
well, I'm sure you're a pretty darn good bike handler after doing, you know, racing, riding BMX stuff, then racing cross country, doing dirt jumps and going through all of that into downhill riding. That's a ton of stuff. So you just build kind of a comfort on the bike. Let's rewind like way back when you were a kid, um, and your transition from cross country like into downhill. So that's pretty common for a lot of young kids. They'll start with cross country stuff and work their way into downhill. But what do you feel like are the necessary components to be a successful downhill racer that cross country helped you with?
that's an interesting one. I think it's the aerobic conditioning you need as a downhill racer is pretty underestimated at the beginning because I mean in the race scenario and training scenario there is not a lot of aerobic load on your body, so you would naturally think, well, I don't need to log amounts, but having a strong aerobic engine so you can actually put on the time, testing and practicing on the track is makes a huge difference. And also, what people forget sometimes, what's also not often shown on the TV, is that there are some pedally bits in between the steep sections on most tracks, especially around here. We are living in, you can't really call it mountains. It's more the medium hilly range. So there's a large share of flat sections where you really have to put the power down to maintain momentum.
Something with that too that, downhill racing, if you were to look at a power file, many times it's a harsh spike of power coming out of a turn or coming out of the start or through some sort of section that sucks your momentum. Then after that, you really have to apply a lot of power. Or like you said, there are some sections that are truly pedally.
Yeah,
But really they're very high efforts, way above threshold. And then after that, you don't get to fully rest since you're descending and you're going through this stuff at such a pace. It's very physically demanding. It's akin to imagine riding a bull and then jumping off of the bull and doing a sprint and then jumping back onto the bull. And then you do that for like, top to bottom. That would be
yeah,
really difficult. But it's actually interestingly in between those anaerobic efforts, as they continue to go on, they become more and more aerobic because you exhaust your anaerobic stores. It's kind of like having two fuel tanks. That anaerobic one runs down really fast, and then you have the aerobic one. So you have to aerobically create more power, which, like you said, it's really important to have more aerobic fitness,
yeah,
even though it seems like it's, really intense and really short efforts. They become increasingly aerobic, and then the bridge between, if those long spikes or those tall spikes are like a suspension bridge pylon, the suspension bridge is the long cable between them, and that connection point also needs to be in most cases aerobic, aerobically created, I should say. So that's a really interesting point that probably not a lot of people understand, that sort of
yeah.
fitness makes you faster, right?
Exactly. I mean, to be quite honest, even I didn't fully understand this at the time. Right now, looking back with all the endurance training knowledge that I accumulated over the past years, fully realized how much I might have left on the table at that time by not putting enough effort into the aerobic training. So yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were a very successful downhill racer. For those that don't know and don't follow that sport, Europe definitely has some of the strongest racers, if not traditionally the strongest racers in the downhill scene. And if you're competitive at a national level, that shows that you were doing very well at a very difficult sport to do well at. One of the questions I want to ask with this too is injury and avoiding injury, because that sport is extremely brutal. Just the speeds are high, the consequences are high, and the terrain is really
Yeah.
difficult. So a small mistake can get magnified. Did you experience
Yeah.
injuries, and how did you avoid them?
Knock on wood, nothing really serious. I once broke my clavicle,
Hmm.
but not even in a downhill race, but more in a end of season, let's go some dirt jumping scenario. So I was really lucky to not break any bones riding downhill, but there is a risk. You try to stay ahead of it as much as you can by wearing all the protections that you can get. And at the time, I was doing a fair bit of strength training just to have some mass on my upper body to help with the impact in case something goes wrong.
What do us beginners do when we go ride downhill? We go to some ski resort where they rent bikes, right, in the summer, and then we rent the bike and then we go up the lifts and we ride down. What are the common mistakes that you see us make that might make that experience a bit more enjoyable for non-downhill racers?
Um, to be honest, I would say two things. It's the classic look far ahead, look where you're going, not look where your front wheel is. That's something that applies probably to all disciplines of cycling. Um, keep your eyes way ahead on the trail so you know what's coming. And I think the even more important one, especially for beginners, is um, it's really not a shame to take the first 2 or 3 runs easy and really stop and look where you're going, because I mean you can't process all that on the fly. If there is a blind corner or if there is a drop, you don't know what's behind it. It's terrible. So it's actually what most racers do on race weekends. The first, when this track opens, what do? You do a track walk. You walk down the track and take pictures and look at everything really at rest. And um, that's probably the best thing you can do when you're at the bike park for the first time. Just take your time, check out where you're going, try to remember the difficult sections so that you can commit to them with confidence when you go down the next
That was
run.
gonna that was gonna be my next question right there is how did you learn a track quickly with taking pictures and that sort of stuff? But is there anything else that you found to help yourself really remember a specific section or commit it to memory?
To be honest, it was probably the most difficult part for me personally to really, really remember and internalize the track. But track walk was played a huge role, and for me, it was I tried to get in as many practice runs as possible. Oftentimes, sectioning specific certain parts of the track. So when there was a difficult part, I would stop. I would push up the section, ride it, push up again until I really have committed it to memory. So
Yeah.
that's how you did it step by step. And nowadays, of course, you take a GoPro and have a video of the track to look over dinner, maybe to just make sure that you remember as much as you can.
Do you still ride downhill these days at all?
To be honest, not really full on downhill, not anymore. I still have a 160 mil trail bike around that's currently converted to a kid's bike. So there's a seat on the top tube, but I'm nowadays it's more of the occasional trail riding.
Yeah, got it. Perfect. So you mentioned that you moved to a different region. Mountain biking was a whole lot more difficult just because there weren't many mountains, and then you took up road. What was that
Yeah,
transition like? Because I'd even say that at least here in the United States, um, there's almost like a bit of like, well, you are a totally different tribe and don't associate me, says the downhill
yeah,
racer or the road racer about the other side. Like downhill mountain bikers and road racing or road riding usually don't mix. Ironically, the top athletes constantly, they use it in their training regimens to increase their
yeah.
fitness and everything else. But was that a hard transition to make, even just like maybe socially, like internally, like now I'm going to be a road rider?
Uh, Now, for me, I was completely happy. I just enjoy riding bikes in any shape or form. So I never had um, any concerns about riding a road bike. I can tell you that I garnered a few questioning looks from my former downhill mates when they saw me fully clad in lycra. The road cycling community was extremely welcoming, so they didn't really look down. I mean, there was a lot to learn. It's completely different because when you come from a mountain bike background, you can ride a bike, but you can't ride a bike in a group. So you really have to think when you're riding in a group, what's happening in front of you, what's happening behind you. That took quite some adjusting and getting it to a different mindset. That when you're riding in a group, you're sort of responsible for everybody else and can't just hang it out there.
Yeah. Did you find that there was one thing, and it may be riding in a group, but one thing that you found particularly difficult to learn as a downhill rider coming into road cycling, whether that was like even pacing, whether that was how you cornered the bike because it was different, or maybe just the group dynamic?
Yeah, a few things. So the group dynamic is certainly among the top issues that you really have to keep in mind. There are people in front of you, people behind you, and if you do erratic movements, it sort of affects everybody else. The apart from that, yes, pacing was definitely completely different to really get accustomed to the steady state efforts. Also to not push into the next roller as hard as you can and then coast down, but to sort of try to keep more momentum going. That definitely, and personally for me, I found the whole situation of being on the road with motorists was at extremely high stress level at the beginning. So when you're not used to being passed by cars, you sort of think that most of them are out there to kill you. It takes some time to adjust to the whole stress level that most motorists are certainly have seen you and are not out there to do you any harm.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I still struggle with. The stress level is still high, and I've
Yeah.
only ridden, in the United States, and then I have ridden in Germany. And when I rode in Germany, it was actually very pleasant. Actually, in Austria too, down in the corner down there, but it's very pleasant, and the motorists were impressively like kind compared to here in the
Mhm.
United States. So, but no matter what, it's so nerve wracking when you first start riding and there are cars zooming by you. That's really
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah,
But
that's definitely maybe one upside that really surprised me at the beginning is how much distance you can cover on a road bike compared to a mountain bike. It's like going for 100K mountain bike ride is that's a tall order on a weekend. Going out for 100K with a few mates on the road is it's it's still a long distance, but it's not half as difficult as going on a mountain bike ride.
right, exactly. It's impressive how much ground you can cover for
Yeah,
sure. So when you got into this, I think around that time is when you, or actually, at some point you discovered, I think our podcast first, but the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast before you signed up for Trainer Road. Is that right?
yeah, exactly. So it was around the time when I transitioned into road cycling, and I was looking for resources to well soak up more knowledge about how everything works. Found your
Mhm.
podcast and listened to everything up until the by then latest episode, and from there I um, also became a subscriber to Trainer Road.
Yeah, which is awesome. Thank you for doing that, by the way. It's cool that, I mean, that's why you're on this podcast right now. So what was your learning curve like? Did you find that it took a long time to get comfortable on the road bike, or like what I would say is like competitive, like you were able to like hang with the group rides comfortably, or did you learn it pretty quickly?
It was a pretty quick process in the beginning. At least from a pure performance perspective, I was fairly quickly up there, at least with a normal group ride. When the big guys said it's hammer time, then I was clearly struggling, but that took a while longer. But to stay with the group and to sort of behave acceptably in the group was a pretty quick process, um, thanks to the people I wrote with, but also thanks to, for example, your podcast. That was a tremendous source of knowledge by then.
Sweet. Awesome.
Yeah,
That's good to know. Uh, when did you make the pivot, or did you do any road racing at all in this time? Because eventually you went into triathlon, forgive me, and you actually
yeah.
started racing within that. Was there something, or did you ever do any competitive road riding at all?
No, not really. I signed up for a couple of road races in this region, but They were like 100K point-to-point races where I just hung with the pack, and I didn't race so much. I just participate.
Mm-hmm.
The goal was always to move towards triathlon.
Got it. So that was the intent, was to go toward tri from the beginning. When did you do your first triathlon? Because you mentioned that you had ran the whole way through and you had regularly
Yeah,
been a runner. So
yeah. So running was always the how do you say my off-season aerobic conditioning sport. So beginning in my late teens, I took up running, and then I always maintained some form of running fitness, not particularly high, but I always ran, and so this was the natural transition for me to see how I can combine those two.
hmm.
And then I did my first sprint triathlon, I think in 2015.
How did that
So
go? Because it's interesting. A lot of people with their first sprint triathlon, like it's a bit of a mess because they may be new to the
uh,
whole concept. But you had been cycling for a long time. You had been running for a long time. So how did it go?
it was in that respect no exception to the rule. It was still a terrible terrible experience. No, it was by then I never learned to swim properly, so I just jumped into the cold water, um, quite literally, and it um, it was a 500-meter swim, I think, and it was a near-death experience. I would say that I was extremely nervous and anxious, and I think I had leaky goggles, so I lost one of my contacts
Oh
in the
no.
water, and um, I had to breaststroke like three quarters of the swim.
Oh,
Um, the bike ride was the transition was a mess. The bike ride was okay, but nowhere near as far as the proper triathletes on their TT bike. So there was also an eye-opening experience for me to see, because by then I thought, well, I'm sort of a quick guy, right? I've been riding bikes for
mm,
so long. I'm a fast dude, but I was nowhere near the fast guys then, so they just applaud by me. And the run was more a hobble than a run, so because I wasn't really used to running after riding, so it was. I was pretty happy at the finish line, but it wasn't elegant and it wasn't fast.
yeah, I'm sure. Let's break it down with all three disciplines. How did you
Yeah,
become a better swimmer? What did you do to improve that?
I took lessons. So the one of the local triathlon clubs, they offered lessons. I think 10 by 2 hours, um, beginner triathlete lessons, which gave me the tools and the understanding to really start training for myself. Because until then, it was just no matter how much time I spent in the pool, I didn't come any better because I didn't know what good looked like. So that helped tremendously, and from then on, I just um, tried to focus on good form. I joined the triathlon club, so one of the coaches there would occasionally point out like one of the many mistakes I made to work on for the next 4 weeks, and so gradually worked my way in towards still not good, but sort of acceptable swimmer.
Was there something in particular with your technique where you had a breakthrough when you changed a certain aspect of how you were swimming? Like what had the most impact?
There are so many things. I think in the beginning, uh, I think in the beginning, one of the big steps was to keep your head and your face down, which is kind of a counterintuitive because your reflex is to keep your head up as much as possible. But looking down towards the bottom of the pool, it raises your hips, it raises your legs. It's a much better water position, and then from there, um, breathe to the side and not sort of to the front. So
Mm,
that made a huge difference. It made breathing much easier, and it sort of streamlined the position in the water.
yeah.
Combine this with the realization that you exhale underwater, so you have more time to breathe in once you have your face out of the water. That made a huge difference in the beginning.
So I guess what was your improvement rate like? Like, I don't know if you had any measurements of where you were in the beginning to where you are now, but what sort of improvement were you able to make in the swim? It could also be like relative finish in a field,
Yeah.
something like that.
Um, so the first milestone was to actually go the 70.3 swim distance of 1.9K without stopping,
Mm.
and that was achieved. I did my first 70.3 in 2017 in Florida, and then I swam like something around 40 minutes, which I was extremely happy with because I front crawled the entire distance, which was the goal.
Hmm.
And from there, my times dropped gradually to 28 minutes in Oman.
Wow, that's impressive. Huge cut down in terms of time. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah.
Are you able to, do you feel like swimming is your relative weakness since you had so much background in the other two still, or do you feel like it's on par with your other disciplines within tri?
It's pretty close. It, as you say, it shouldn't be, but for some reasons, my swim is fairly good. I don't know why, but in terms of um, relative position in the field, my bike leg is currently actually the weakest link of three. I don't know why exactly, but for some reason the swim has caught up with the other two disciplines pretty quickly.
Interesting. So let's talk about the bike.
Yeah,
And you did mention that you got a TT bike at some point to be able
yeah.
to put yourself on a level playing field with the front of the pack. What bike did you get? What size is it, and how tall are you?
It's a Cube Arium C68.
Okay.
It's I think it's a German direct sales company. So it's not a super bike, but a pretty solid TT bike. I wrote it down. I'm 5'7" in American or 173 centimeters tall, and I ride the frame in medium, which is fairly large for my size. So
Hmm.
I look like a small guy on a very big bike, but with my relatively long torso and short legs, it actually fits pretty good.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, right? Like bike size isn't just tied to height; it's tied to
Yeah,
proportion.
yeah.
And so, with a longer torso, have you had to do anything unique in setting up your bike at all? Like, do you have, for example, like longer extensions, or is it just getting the larger size frame?
I think the larger frame did the trick. I had my first CT bike was a Fuji bikes D2 I think, which was a small frame that's on paper should have been the right choice for me, but that was too short. That would have required like a longer stem or longer extension. So I never really got comfortable on that one.
Mm, yeah. So what sort of you mentioned that you used Trainer Road and you went through the whole process. What
Mhm.
was your FTP improvement like? Like where were you when you started versus where are you now?
Um, I I don't know exactly because when I first subscribed to Trainer Road, I was using virtual power without a power meter, without a smart trainer,
Yep.
and uh, the the last 20-minute test I took with virtual power was 320 watts or something. And by
Right.
then I thought, yeah, I must be pretty quick guy. And then I got a power meter and it dropped to like 240 or something. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, but over a season, it's I usually see from starting base. So my off-season power with some riding is maybe 230, 240, and when I'm racing, it's more than 270 to 80 watts
Wow,
range.
that's impressive. Um,
Yeah,
Impressive improvement. And to clarify too on virtual power, it's an estimation of your output, but it's the cool part is you still get all the benefit of training with power because it's all scaled to
yeah,
you. But yeah, once you can't use those numbers to compare them against actual like a power meter
yeah,
because once again it's an estimation. So as long as your tire pressure is consistent, you're set and it works just
yeah,
fine. So
It worked. It worked perfectly. It guided me through the whole process. It was perfect fine. Just the numbers were off by a few watts, but who cares about
yeah,
the numbers?
I did that. I did that as well when I first started. So I was using virtual power, and I think that my threshold was right around 400. And then I got a power meter, and I think that my threshold was somewhere around like 220, 230.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
So
disheartening. Yeah, yeah.
yep. But that's when I learned that, hey, it's okay. I still got all the quality training,
Yeah.
and that was the important thing. So, so what sort of training did you do, like in terms of the plans that you followed, or any adjustments that you made to
Hmm.
to get ready for such a great performance there at Oman
Yeah.
and other ones?
So for the last 3 years, I cycled through the Trainer Road half distance plan. In the beginning, low volume, and this year I stepped it up to mid volume.
Nice.
So I followed most of the cycling workouts to the T, and I do my own swim training because swimming is that's the discipline that gets shoved in the calendar the last. So it's the training that requires the most flexibility, and I design the run workouts together with the coach because that's more tricky. But
Got it.
bike workouts, mostly trainer road. I oftentimes replace um, the shorter aerobic rides in the mid-volume plan with outdoor group rides, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's a great way to be able to manage it, right? Take as much as you can from it, and because you're guaranteed that it's a plan that's designed with the context of multi-sport, but then on top of that, it also has room for you to be able to add in things like that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
add in those group rides and other stuff like that. So it's although it's always tough on the group ride to keep it aerobic, but
yeah.
uh, so that's and then you see some pretty solid improvement when you follow those plans as you go through every year. What's your schedule like, and when do you train? Like, what's your work schedule like, and how do you fit it all in?
uh, it's it's all over the place. So at the beginning of every week, I sit down, I make a plan. I because until February, I had quite a large share of business trips. So usually one or two international trips per month.
Mm,
So that usually requires I don't have a fixed weekly schedule, but I usually at the beginning of the week I sit down with my wife and then we make a plan and see where and how everything fits in. Trying to be as efficient as possible, which is another reason why I spend so much time on Trainer Road because it gives me so much return on my invested time.
mhm.
Uh,
Yeah. Do you have to train before work or after work most? You like you say it changes, but do you typically find that you have to fit it in at different times? Because
yeah, there.
doing the low volume plan and then going into the mid volume, I assume that you're time constrained.
Yeah, so it's before work, it's after work, sometimes even lunch break. I do. My wife and I, we take turns who's taking our daughter to the kindergarten. So
Hmm.
when it's her turn, I have time for workout in the morning. I usually um, reserve this for tempo or aerobic rides because it's really tough for me to get the high intensity work done early in the morning.
Hmm.
Um, After work, that's usually the higher intensity stuff. And recently, a new pool opened near my office where I can actually go for a swim in my lunch break, which is quite nice.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the tough thing. At least where I'm at locally, there's just not a lot of pools here in Reno. It's crazy because we've had
Yeah,
really good swimmers that have come out of this region. Even Amber's one of them.
yeah,
Our Amber Pierce, one of our podcast hosts, and um, yeah, you'd think we'd have more. Hopefully, we get some more. So because that would be because eventually I'll be doing this triathlon training stuff, and that's going to be absolutely
yeah.
crazy. So on the run, let's talk about that. How you had always ran. So how did your running change in terms of what you did for like training or what your runs looked like? How did that change once you started training for triathlon?
It changed insofar as I wasn't injured anymore all the time. So previously, I would have during the summer half of the year, would do I would do cycling. most of the time and only some running. And this would switch completely over the winter, where I would spend most of my time running and very little cycling. So I would come into the running half um, with this acceptable aerobic engine from the cycling, but pretty brittle bones and tendons and everything. And by the time spring rolls around, I'm usually injured. That's not the case anymore because I'm running and cycling throughout the entire year.
Mm.
But apart from everything, I think it's I don't think it's the triathlon, but the consistency overall that has brought my running to a new level. Just training consistently for the entire year, keeping volume within a reasonable range so that I don't have all the injuries to lug around, has really helped to bring my running to the next level.
Awesome. So what sort of pace would you run? I don't know if you have any benchmarks from like when you started or before triathlon to now. Like what sort of pace do you try to carry in the 70.3 now?
Um, I'm still not entirely sure about this because um, the race in February was the first time that I actually outpaced my race plan. So
Mm,
I was planning for a slightly slower run. Um, I'm I'm looking to maintain something around a few seconds off my half marathon pace. It depends on how hard the bike is, but um, it's uh, it's hard to give you any comparison because I haven't run a half marathon in a while without cycling before it. I'm looking for me the indicators. I'm usually doing just one tempo or interval session per week.
mhm.
That's progressing from 1K intervals to 3K intervals close to race day. And for me, the benchmark is my 1K repeat pace. So I'm looking
Mhm.
to get this down in the 325, 320 range shortly before the race. That's when I know that I can run around a 4 minute per kilometer on race day.
Right. Yeah, because it's so different once you throw in the other disciplines, right? It's tricky to be able
Yeah.
to maintain it. So you've Torsten, you've covered such a wide gamut of cycling experiences. Has downhill racing, how does that make you a better triathlete? Does it, first of all? This is just a question that probably we never really get to ask this because I don't know many
Yeah.
downhill racers that do triathlon. So, does downhill make you a better triathlete in any way?
I've, I, I'm not entirely sure. There are so many great triathletes out there who haven't sat on a downhill bike in their entire life, so I'm not sure. It definitely it gives you confidence at high speeds on the bike. I think that's one of the major things. You really don't worry whether you're going downhill at 60 kph or 80 because you're just going fast. You're not too much worried about crosswinds or anything like that because you're sort of used to reacting the bike shifting underneath you. So that's probably it makes a difference. Yeah, but it's not winning any races. That's for sure.
Was riding in the arrow position still awkward for you at first when you first started doing it?
Uh yeah, yes, it's a very weird feel to be down in your arrow bars. It's um it's offset a bit by just the sheer speed that you're experiencing that makes
Yeah.
up for a bit, much of the awkwardness. But absolutely, yeah, it feels weird. The TT bike, even in the drops, feels weird with so much weight on your front wheel and everything. But you get used to it pretty quickly.
So that just shows even a really good downhill racer still feels uncomfortable at first in the arrow position. So it's not,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, yeah. You're not alone if you're listening to this and thinking like, man, it's just so hard to get used to or it feels awkward. That's normal. It's
Yeah.
because it's an awkward position, just flat out. Has mountain biking, like as you did with cross country or anything like that, I mean, obviously it's contributed to, your aerobic base for years now. You've been a fit person for years as a result of that. But do you ever notice that giving you any particular advantage in triathlon? I mean, it's hard to say. We're talking polar opposites of steady state stuff versus surgy and everything else. Have you found any benefits
Yeah.
there though?
I can't really put my finger on specific aspects. I think in general, having ridden bikes for most of my life, you never really question whether you can actually go the distance on the bike. You just have the confidence that you can ride a bike and you can ride it for pretty much any distance. And I think that makes a big difference. That in your mind you can worry about the run, you can worry about the swim, but you sort of check off the bike and think, yeah, just do the work and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So at this point, Torsten, I think that you just need to start racing cyclocross and criteriums, and then I think that you've basically got the whole gamut covered. That's the only stuff that's left there. But in all seriousness, I'm super impressed with the diverse athlete that you are, and I think that and I know that it's a really rare thing, and I think that it's really cool. What sort of like take home message would you want to share people about that with people listening to this about that? Whether it's, to not put yourself in a box or whether it's to try new things, something like that, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's surely not to put yourself in a box. I'm always a bit confused when there are discussions going on in the group, right? Who's a sprinter and who's a puncher and who's more of a climber. I think, well, let's just let's just ride our bikes, right? And so I think it's riding a bike is what sort of unites all the people, and I think we can all just benefit from trying out different things. I can tell you that once I convinced my road cycling buddies to go on a mountain bike ride with me, they actually absolutely loved it. Um, Plenty of my previous mountain bike lads are now also proud owners of a road bike to get some miles in. So it's there is so much a bicycle can do for you, and so much you can do on a bicycle, and there is absolutely benefit to trying different things out. So don't put yourself in a box and try new stuff and have fun doing that.
Awesome. Torsten, thank you so much, man. This has been an awesome podcast. And once racing resumes, once we get through this pandemic scenario that we're all in right now, it'll be exciting to see where your half times are at. And is there a full on the horizon for you? Are you planning on doing a full at any point?
Yeah, I mean, I still have. I did a full in 2018, which wasn't a proper full because the swim was cancelled. So it was more of a very large uh, duathlon. Maybe at some later stage. I don't think I can fit in the time and the value to do another full. But
Yeah.
I mean, my my long distance friends, they are still making fun of me that I haven't properly finished, and I should give back. I should give back the Ironman medal, but yeah, I'll I'll earn it one day in the future. But there are no immediate plans.
Awesome. That's cool. Well, thanks, Torsten. If any of you are curious about anything from this episode, if you want to talk to Torsten about DH stuff, mountain biking, cross country style, group riding, road riding, triathlon, all the different things that he's done, just head over to the forum and you can search for this episode. Just search for Torsten's name and you can find it there in the forum. You can join in on the chat. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, then you can try Trainer Road. And of course, if you want to be on the Successful Athletes podcast, all you have to do is at this point right now, it will change in the future, but just shoot me an email, jonathan@trainerroad.com. We want to hear from you of how you've used Trainer Road to become successful in one way or another, whether it's like this, experiencing a ton of different disciplines or performing well at them, or maybe it's something very different. But share that with me and let me know. I'd appreciate it. And with all that said, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks for having me. Bye bye.